David has now left Jerusalem barefooted and weeping with hundreds of his faithful friends. It's a sad sight. Over a 4-year period, Absalom, his son, had managed to execute a strategy to win the hearts of the people and turn them against his father David. Absalom is now taken over the throne, and along with hundreds of his companions, he's on his way to kill his father. Try to imagine that. Now, as if that isn't enough, out of the blue comes this weird character named Shimei. I want to read his story from 2 Samuel chapters 16 and 19 from the Message. We'll use sections of those two chapters. This is from the Message, 2 Samuel chapter 16, beginning with verse 5. When the king got to Bahurim, a man appeared who had connections with Saul's family. His name was Shimei, son of Gera. As he followed along, he shouted insults and threw rocks right and left at David and his company, servants and soldiers alike. To the accompaniment of curses, he shouted, get lost, you butcher, you hellhound. God has paid you back for all your dirty work in the family of Saul and for stealing his kingdom. God has given the kingdom to your son, Absalom. Look at you now, ruined. And good riddance, you pathetic old man. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, this mangy dog can't insult my master the king this way. Let me go over and cut off his head. But the king said, why are you sons of Zeruiah always interfering and getting in the way? If he's cursing, it's because God told him, curse David. So who dares raise questions? Besides, continued David to Abishai and the rest of his servants, my own son, my flesh and bone, is right now trying to kill me. Compared to that, this Benjaminite is small potatoes. Don't bother with him. Let him curse. He's preaching God's word to me, and who knows? Maybe God will see the trouble I'm in today and exchange the curses for something good. David and his men went on down the road, while Shimei followed along on the ridge of the hill alongside, cursing, throwing stones down on them, and kicking up dirt. Now, this next encounter with Shimei occurs after Absalom had been murdered. So we move ahead in time. He again shows up from nowhere while David's family and belongings are being transported back to Jerusalem. You might remember that what he had done to David earlier was punishable by death. Pretty interesting, you'll find. So now we turn to chapter 19, beginning with verse 15. So the king returned. He arrived at the Jordan just as Judah reached Gilgal, on their way to welcome the king and escort him across the Jordan. Even Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried down to join the men of Judah so he could welcome the king, 1,000 Benjaminites with him. And Ziba, Saul's steward, with his 15 sons and 20 servants, waded across the Jordan to meet the king and brought his entourage across, doing whatever they could to make the king comfortable. Shimei, son of Gera, bowed deeply in homage to the king as soon as he was across the Jordan and said, don't think badly of me, my master. Overlook my irresponsible outburst on the day my master, the king, left Jerusalem. Don't hold it against me. I know I sinned, but look at me now, the first of all the tribe of Joseph to come down and welcome back my master, the king. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, interrupted, enough of this. Shouldn't we kill him outright? Why, he cursed God's anointed. But David said, what is it with you sons of Zeruiah? Why do you insist on being so contentious? Nobody is going to be killed today. I am again king over Israel. Then the king turned to Shimei. You're not going to die. And the king gave him his word. A hungry tramp was looking for a handout in a quaint old village some time ago. I read this past week, and he came upon an interesting inn, a pub that had the name
Unique name, the Inn of St. George and the Dragon. So he went in rather sheepishly, and it was a rather nice place, and he rapped on the kitchen door, and a woman walked up who was the cook, and she said to him, "What do you want?" He was tattered and obviously dirty from having lived in the streets, and he said, "Please, ma'am, could you spare a bite for me to eat?" And she responded, "A bite to eat for a no-good bum? No, go get a job like anybody else in this city and work for your food." He walked out and was about halfway down the street and turned around. He looked back at the sign that was swinging out in front, and it read, St. George and the Dragon. And he went back and he knocked on the door again, and he said, "Well, ma'am, if St. George is in, may I speak to him this time?" And I've discovered in my few years on earth that sometime people have to ask the second time to get through the dragon inside of us, especially in the areas of their humanity. We don't like to forgive people. We have a lot easier time forgiving big sins than we do little humanities that come out, right? We're pretty savage people. An Indian lived through the attack of a Bengal tiger, and he told the story after it was over. After the first rush that sent me sprawling, the tiger lay, ears flat, tail swishing from side to side, eyes glaring, waiting my next move. I ran. He cut me off. I dashed for a tree. He struck me down. Each time I was torn more terribly. Yet the game lurched on and on to utter exhaustion and despair. I was bleeding. At last, beyond caring or hoping, I played dead. His hot breath seared my neck. His jaws clamped my arm as he dragged me into the brush and left me to cool. There is a tiger in all of us. There is a mean cat. And the simple fact is, when we have those masks off, get pretty brutal. Tonight I want you to make your list, not a phony list, but the real list that only you know of people you have not forgiven. Make it in your mind. You don't want somebody else to read your list. It may take you a while, but for God's sake, make the list. You see, my desire in going through the life of David is not just to give you geography and genealogy and a lot of high-powered historical scoop on his life and have you walk away with a notebook full of facts. My desire is to have you see David in your own shoes and vicariously to begin to emulate some of his godly qualities, one of which was broad shoulders. Now, most of us opt for one of three different responses instead of forgiveness. And I want you to take note of these three because some of you are engaged in them right now. No pity, no mercy, but you've gone through the motions of forgiveness. The first kind of common reaction instead of complete forgiveness is what I call conditional forgiveness. I will forgive you if. I will forgive you as soon as. I will forgive you whenever. Then you finish the sentence. If you come back and make things right, I'll forgive you. If you own up to your part of it, then I'll forgive you. That's conditional forgiveness. That says I'm waiting like a tiger swishing his tail. You make your move and I'll determine whether it's time to back away or bite. Conditional forgiveness. The second kind of forgiveness that's less than perfect is partial forgiveness, which says, I forgive you, but, and then you finish it. For example, but don't expect me to forget, or I forgive you, just get out of my life. Or I'll forgive you until that happens again. That is partial forgiveness. The one that is very common is the third, and that's delayed forgiveness. I'll forgive you, just give me some time. Someday, sometime, I'll follow through. I'll forgive you. I just read this afternoon, someone wrote in a rather simple manner, most of us would rather sit on a judgment seat than a mercy seat. Isn't that the truth? Coming up with your list? You think I'm kidding with you. I'm not. Part of the reason you don't find freedom in your life is you haven't dealt with your list of people you need to forgive. Absolutely, totally, not conditionally or partially or in a delayed fashion, but totally. Let me show you the alternative. I've got a little stair step downward in my mind. It's sort of a downward plunge you take when you don't forgive. First of all, there is an offense. And then if there isn't forgiveness after the offense, there is resentment. And if there isn't resentment following that, if there isn't forgiveness following that resentment, then there is hatred. And then hatred leads to grudge. And finally, grudge settles in revenge. I'm just waiting my time, and when I have my chance, I'll get them. It is amazing how much of this goes on in the family of Christians. Just amazing. Now, I'm going to level with you and tell you that years ago I couldn't have preached this message because I hadn't come to terms with these truths. Since I have, thank God, since He's helped me with it, I can honestly say I do not know of an individual I have not forgiven. That is a tremendous relief. I say that in no sense of pride. I say that just as an honest fact to encourage some of you to know that it can happen. I don't know of anyone that I have a grudge against, that I feel resentment toward. But the same heart that beats inside of you beats inside of me. I tell you, I'd wrestle with this on a regular basis. Every week, I have to come to terms with not letting that offense take one step down to resentment. I have to deal with it at the offense level, or I'm a goner. Sometimes those things just kind of roll off like water down a little slide, and you're all the way to the bottom toward revenge before you even realize it. Now, David, what a great guy. What a real, believable person. Chapter 16 of David's life is a low ebb. Since he's taken the throne, he has never been lower. Never. This could be compared to his time before he was on the throne when Saul was pursuing him. And he was so depressed, so low. David is right in the pits, right in the bottom, and there's nowhere else to go. You know what's happened to him? Well, he sinned with Bathsheba, and that set off a whole chain reaction. Nathan said, oh, your wives will be taken advantage of in public, and that happened. Your family will turn against you, and that's happened. He lost his throne. His son came in revolt and through a conspiracy overthrew his dad, and now Absalom is reigning as the king, and David's on the run. He is at his lowest ebb, and there's nowhere else to go to get any lower. He's at the bottom. I think it's at this time that he wrote these words from this psalm, and I'll just read it to you. I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined to me and heard my cry. He brought me up out of the pit of destruction, out of the miry clay, and set my feet on a rock. He was in the pit. And listen to this other statement. For evils beyond number have surrounded me. My iniquities have overtaken me, so that I am not able to see. They are more numerous than the hairs of my head. My heart has failed me. Ever felt like that? Maybe you do tonight. Now, in the bottom, in the despairing moment, with guilt sort of crushing in on top of him, in the pit of destruction, verse 5, chapter 16 of 2 Samuel begins to speak. And I've set up the context so you can feel the barb of this man Shimei. You'll never forget Shimei after this study. Never. When King David came to Bahurim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came out cursing continually as he came. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were at his right hand and at his left. And thus Shimei said when he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed, you worthless fellow. The Lord has returned upon you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. Behold, you are taken in your own evil, for you are a man of bloodshed. The Living Bible reads, get out of here, you murderer, you scoundrel, he shouted back at David. The Lord is paying you back for murdering King Saul and his family. That was a lie. You stole his throne. That was another lie. And now the Lord has given it to your son. That's a third lie. The Lord never gave the son the throne. The son took the throne. At last you will taste some of your own medicine, you murderer. And you feel the tiger inside David. This is your basic reprobate who makes it his business of kicking you while you're down. Ever had that happen? Not a person in this place that hasn't had it happen. You're at the very ultimate lowest pit, and along comes a Shimei, boom, hits you below the belt. And sure enough, along comes someone else to give you the kind of counsel David heard. See verse 9? Abishai. Keep that name in mind. Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord, the king? Let me go over now and cut off his head. That's rather direct counsel from Abishai. You'll always have somebody that'll say to you, hey, you have to take that. Let me handle him. Well, I'm good at this. I mean, you got your rights. Stand up for yourself. Don't let them walk all over you. Operation Doormat. I will cut off his head. Now, before I go any further, let me add that Shimei is a real first-class fink. Okay? He has come at David at a hard moment. He has lied 3 times in the attack, and he is way out of line. David is innocent, at least of these assaults. David has a choice. He can become offended or not. Verse 10. What a guy. The king said, what have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah? If he says that once in his lifetime, he says it a half dozen times. Sons of Zeruiah were all built with a short fuse. Every one of them was ready to fight at the first glimmer. They carried a chip on their shoulder, always ready to fight. And he says, what have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah? If he curses, and if the Lord has told him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so? Verse 12, perhaps the Lord will look on my affliction and return good to me instead of his cursing this day. I can't believe it. Now maybe you can, but that is unbelievable. He's at the bottom level, and along comes Shimei and boots him, and David says, the Lord's in it. How in the world can he do it? That's a good question. As a matter of fact, it's when you're able to do that that you'll know the joy of a clear conscience. He never got offended. He never took it personally. Now, I'd say something here for the sake of a few of you that need to hear it. I would to God that some of you would develop a much thicker layer of skin. Some of you are so sensitive, so delicate. At the slightest little pinprick, you tube out and you're in a hospital for 3 weeks recovering, virtually. Soft heart and thick skin, that's the answer. I mean really thick, really rhinoceros type, okay? Really thick, so that you can get punched around and punched around. If you want to be used of God, get that kind of skin, whatever it takes. The people that get the job done nowadays are able to overlook all sorts of silly little comments people are going to make. When you walk through thorns, you have to have on heavy boots. You don't walk through thorns barefooted. If you're going to deal with people, you've got to be well shod. If you're involved in ministry or you plan to be in the distant future or near future, get that lesson learned. Get really an armor plate around you, or you're doomed to failure. You will not make it. Now, it's not that you have a thickness toward God, it's that you have a thickness toward these kind of reptiles that crawl out of the swamp and sort of come in at you, like the Shimei. You'll meet a Shimei. It's only a matter of time. You come in on your case. And you'll have the question of whether I'm going to be offended or whether I'm going to let that go. Hey, hang on to this one. Dale Galloway writes in his book, You Can Win with Love, the story of John D. Rockefeller, the man who built the great Standard Oil empire. He was a man who demanded high performance from his company's executives. One day, one of the executives made a $2 million mistake. I can't believe it. I don't even know how to write $2 million, much less make that kind of mistake. The news of the man's enormous error soon spread through all the executive staff. During this entire day, these men made themselves scarce and were afraid to even go near Rockefeller's office for fear of his reaction towards this mistake. But one brave executive decided he would go ahead and keep his appointment and go in to see Mr. Rockefeller. He tightened his belt, walked in the door. As the oil monarch was writing on a piece of paper, looked up and abruptly said, I guess you've heard about the $2 million mistake our friend made. Yes, he said, expecting Rockefeller to explode. Then he said, I've been listing all the good qualities of our friend here on a sheet of paper, and I've discovered that in the past, he has made us many more times than the amount he lost for us today by his one mistake. His good points far outweigh this one human error that I think we ought to forgive him. Don't you? Oh, wouldn't you love to have a boss like that? Man. Hey, it doesn't take a $2 million mistake. It takes just an off-the-cuff comment, and we're sidelined. Why? Because our focus is so horizontal. Our God is some distant deity that sits around the theological heavenlies, answering doctrinal questions, not meeting practical needs. And so when something practical happens, we're goners. Rather than focusing right away on the vertical and saying, oh, Lord, right now, you take that offense. Give me a bigger mind than that. Maybe he wants to live in that narrow world. I don't. Some of you need to do that with your parents. Some of you need to do that with your kids. You can dangle your kids. Your kids will blow it, and then they'll finally come back and they'll say, you know, I blew it. I had no business doing such and such. And you can dangle them there for weeks and play that cruel game of making them wonder where they stand with you, when they were men or women enough to say, I did wrong. The most gracious and mature response is, perhaps the Lord will look on the affliction and return good to me instead of cursing. Okay, now keep that in the corner of your mind, because we're going to look at the other side of the case. Chapter 19 is Plan B. Here we find David in this 19th chapter, beginning about verse 16. On the other side, now, Absalom has been brutally murdered against David's wish, but Absalom is removed from the throne, and all of a sudden people are turning back to David, and they're moving his household goods back over the Jordan to get him back on the throne. It's a day of coronation. It's a day of delight. He's come from the low level up to the highest mountaintop, and it's a great experience of rejoicing as David is about to be enthroned again as the king. And of all things, up comes the reptile. Verse 16. Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. And there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, with Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him. They rushed to the Jordan before the king, and they kept crossing the ford to bring over the king's household. So they're in a hurry to get him back on the throne. It's a great day to do what was good in his sight. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. He said to the king, "Let not my lord consider me guilty. Now remember what your servant did wrong on the day when my lord the king came out from Jerusalem, so that the king should take it to heart. For your servant knows that I have sinned." The three hardest words in the English language to say to the one you've offended. But he said it, "Because I have sinned. Therefore I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my lord the king. I am wrong." Before I go any further, and I know you're anxious to see how that response came out, let me add that you might be in the shoes of Shimei. You know, we picture Shimei as some distant kind of caricature that lived in the Old Testament, but there are Shimeis here. We've all played that role. You've done what is wrong. You know you've done what is wrong. You have said, you have done, you have whatever. And you know an individual has been hung up on that. And you're not free, and he or she is not free, and the ball's in your court. It's your serve. It's your move. Do it. That's why you made up the list. Now, don't make a false list. Don't feel you'll be more spiritual if your list is longer. Just honestly, in an authentic manner, just unveil in an honest manner your life before your own mind in the Lord's eyes, and come up with individuals that you've got to come to terms with. That's tough, isn't it? I've had to do this with our children on occasion. It's hard. And because it's very, very personal between us, I don't want to use it as an illustration and exploit it. But rather recently, I came to terms with one of our children, and I got some time with that particular one, and we really had a talk, and I made it very clear that I was just, if not 100%, almost 100% in the wrong, while the child was in the right. And I took advantage of the child. And all alone, quietly, we, through tears and in almost an hour's time, got it all worked through. Boy, it's beautiful. It's hard. It's gutsy stuff. And so unlike the way I was raised. I wasn't raised to do that. I was raised, just like you were. You can't do it. Why? Because I said so. Which has to be the super dumb answer in all the universe, Because I said so isn't an answer. It's an excuse. It's a cop-out. And parents don't apologize to children. Says it where? Show it to me. If a child is offended by an angry or offending father, he needs to have forgiveness by the one that offended him. I don't care if the child is 3 or 33. That's how you build bridges. That's how you put families back together. You cannot believe the number of individuals we minister to that just can't seem to bring themselves to that simple term that a child is also a person. Here's David. Boy, David could have been indifferent. Hey, that's a safe response. Oh, Shimei. Ignore him, Abishai. George Bernard Shaw writes, "The worst sin toward your fellow creature is not to hate him, but to be indifferent toward him." That's the essence of inhumanity. I'll just cool it. Let him die. That's not forgiveness. That's rage controlled. Well, now, here's David. Shimei is spread all out on the ground, saying, I'm wrong, I did what. And verse 21, oh, God bless him, Abishai. The son of Zeruiah answered and said, "Should not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" You always have that counselor. Here he is again, David. Finish him off. He kicked you when you were down. Kick him back. Kick him hard. Look at 22. You won't believe it. David says, "What have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah?" Oh, man, same song, second verse, a little louder, a little worse, same guy. And you should this day be an adversary to me. That's not the way you handle it. Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For I know that do you not know that I'm king over Israel today? The king said to Shimei, "You shall not die," and he swore to him. You know why he could handle it like that? It was never an offense. Oh, Shimei. Hey, how are you, reptile? You know how come he could forgive? First of all, his vertical focus never got out of whack, never got out of sync. Just, God, you and I can handle this. Dorky thing he said the other day, who cares? God, you take that offense. You're good at offenses. And he was, secondly, very much aware of his own failure. You know who make good forgivers? The forgiven. You know how you can spot an individual who's super proud? He has a hard time forgiving. Just focus back on when you needed forgiveness. Just focus back. Wasn't it a cleansing feeling when that person said, "Hey, it's fine"? Wasn't it horrible when they didn't declare it? Very much aware of his own failures. People in that camp have a tough time with tolerance. They also don't make good leaders. Good leaders have a lot of tolerance. They got a lot of space for humanity. Okay, he swore to him. Now, let me share with you some suggestions, as if we haven't already, on how to put this into action. Got your list, don't you? Okay, number one, cultivate a thicker layer of skin? Well, you say what to do, but you don't tell us how to do it. Hey, that's tough to do. I would ask God for it. That would be a new one to throw on the throne. Lord, new layer of skin, please. Lord, help me not to be so delicate. Lord, take away this silly sensitivity, this delicate China doll mentality of mine, and give me a depth. Make me like Christ. Do that soon. You have a friend, have your friend help you with that. Have your friend whom you respect help you know how to develop that cushion, that buffer that can take those jolts and just bounce right off. You ever seen that that reminds me as I was doing that. You ever seen this little doll you get for your kids? It has a big weight in the bottom. You stand back and go, and that thing goes, it comes back up again. And the kid hits him again and hits him again. He just keeps bouncing back up. You know why? It's got that sense of balance within it. Just keeps bringing it back up. And the slightest little thump, most of us, you think we died. We check out of church. We sit in our room and, can't even pray. Just so thin-skinned. You really need that. Second, try to understand where the offender is coming from. Wow, that takes grace. Try to see beyond the offense and look inside the little boy, inside that man, lashing out. Try to see where the offender is coming from, that little girl inside that woman that's lashing back. Try to figure out, why would they be doing that? Why would they swing at me? Sometimes it's because they've been saving stamps. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Something happens in the home, and you don't express your discontent. You just put a stamp in your book. And then 3 days later, something else happens, and instead of saying, hey, you know what, that really is embarrassing, you just put another stamp. And before long, 3, 4, 5 months, maybe a couple of years, you got a whole book. And then you redeem them. Like he says, honey, come on, let's go. Boom! It's all over the room. And he says, what in the world? And you can say to him, I just redeemed my book. If you are a wise person, you will observe when books have been redeemed. There's a cook over at Coco's, not far from our joint here, where I had supper the other night. And the manager was in a foul mood on Thursday, and he was snapping at the cooks. And our house was a zoo that evening. One kid was going one direction, one another, and Cynthia was taking another one, For all I knew, she was planning to go off the cliff that night. So I thought, I'm going to go over to Coco's and eat a hamburger and then come on the board meeting. And so I was over at the joint and I was eating, and all of a sudden I noticed a little friction. I watched this dynamic happening and I thought, I'll watch this. And so the manager said something strong to the cook, and the cook was just doing his thing. Didn't even get bent out of shape. I got more bent out of shape than the cook did, and I wasn't even involved in it. And the manager said something else to him. His cook was, flipping his pancakes. And finally he put a salad together and he stuck it up there, and I think he left off the parsley or something, and the manager just came into him, and the cook just leaned over and said, okay. And he got the parsley and he stuck it on there, and I thought, what manner of man is he? David reincarnated or something back there. And then I made a note. The manager apologized. He said, hey, it's just not my day. And he told him 2 or 3 things that had happened that had just ticked him off. And then the cook responded, no sweat, man. I understand. I just had to keep telling myself that it couldn't be me. So I've just left you on the back burner, simmering. What a classic answer. You know, the manager standing there. You know what he did? He looked inside, he saw behind the offense, and he thought, hey, that manager's having a bad day. That's great. You'll save all kinds of offenses if you'll just look beyond the silly little stupid comments that are said, and you know down deep inside that something's wrong. Redeeming a book, maybe? Maybe a bad day? Maybe I'm just the closest one. You know, the guy gets yelled at work, and he goes home and screams at his wife, and the wife gets angry and hits one of the kids. The kid walks out, boots the cat, and the cat's on a prowl all night trying to find somebody to bite. We make life so complicated, and it's not that complicated. Just deal with it as it comes. Honesty. Number 3, recall times in your life when you have needed forgiveness and apply the same emotion. Times in your life when you really needed to be forgiven. I can share this. Easter week was unreal. You guys were enjoying it and relaxing in the great truth of the resurrection. I was coming unglued. My family and I were at odds. I had traveled too much. I was gone too much, and it kind of all hit the fan one evening. And the next morning, oldest son was been out of shape, and daughter was at his throat, and he lashed out, and I lashed out, and so breakfast was kind of a disaster. So that evening he took off for work. Things weren't resolved. Cynthia and I were kind of at odds with each other, and I just thought, man, I'm canceling that other trip. So I canceled it. I went home, and I made it right with my wife to start with. Then I dealt with a child, then another, and I thought, Kurt's at work. We got to go out there. So I piled them all in the car. We drove out to where he's working. And it's late in the evening, you know. He doesn't know anything's happening. He's in there cleaning up this building. So we knock on the door, and finally he does come, and he opens the door, and he looks at all of us. And he said, I'm having such a hard night. And he collapsed in his mother's arms. They cried. Kids cried. I cried. And we walked in. He was cleaning this Wycliffe building, and so we sat around this great Wycliffe conference table. All these great missionary pictures on the wall. We're in there bleeding all over the table and patching up wounds, and good stuff happened in that room that night. We just got it all out in the open. We needed forgiveness. Hardly a person in the family hadn't done something that was dumb or offensive. We just dealt with it. No magic, just authenticity. I pray for it all the time. Keep me authentic. Take every phony, baloney cell out of my body. Just keep me real. 4th, verbalize your forgiveness. Say it. Don't think it. Say it. Verbalize your forgiveness with such words as, hey, let's go on from here. Let's go on. Those words are marvelous therapy. I forgive you. Hey, let's go on. Just don't stop. Start over. Let's begin from ground zero up. We learned through it. Let's go on. Stuart Briscoe writes, some years ago, a fashionably dressed woman came to my study, very distressed. She had made a commitment to the Lord a few days earlier, but had asked to see me because something was troubling her. She poured out an unpleasant story concerning an affair she had been having with one of her husband's friends. Then she insisted that her husband should know and that I should tell him. That was a new experience for me. After some discussion with the woman, I called the husband. When he arrived at my study, I told him what had happened. His response was a remarkable and beautiful thing to behold. Turning to his tearful and fearful wife, he said, "I love you. I forgive you. Let's make a new start." Many things had to be straightened out, and much hurt had to be healed. But his response of forgiveness, made possible by his own understanding of the forgiveness of God, became the basis of a new joy and a new marriage. This is hard preaching. Hard hearing, isn't it? Got your list? Go to it. Let's pray. Wow. We try it all, Lord, before we try the right thing. Silence, grudge, religious indifference, even plotting a way to maneuver and manipulate to get our offender in a vulnerable spot so we can kick him. Oh. This is a very real problem that every one of us wrestles with, Lord. Somebody who hears my words at this moment feels the sharp edges of what you have been saying. I pray for you to give great grace to some families, to some working relationships in an office where there is the acid of resentment, to school kids, collegians as well, maybe faculty members, maybe pastors. Help us a lot, Lord. We get really shaky when we think about this kind of stuff. It's one thing to see a cook do it at a corner restaurant. It's something altogether different to stand in his shoes and do it. And so I ask you to help us to put feet to our hope and to do it right, to do it soon. It is in the name of Jesus Christ that I ask this. Amen.
The preceding message, Being Big Enough to Forgive, was copyrighted in 1978, 1988, 1997, and 2009, and the sound recording was copyrighted in 2009 by Charles R. Swindoll, Inc. All rights are reserved worldwide. Duplication of copyrighted material for commercial use is strictly prohibited.